Hey everybody, I'm Curtis.
And I'm Hannah.
And this is Love at First Fright.
Yep.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another historic Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
We got Betty Boop. We got...
I also just want to say, for the people at home, Curtis just spent probably 2.5 minutes silently on his phone looking up which number Oscar it was, only to not include that.
It was coming up. It was part of the script.
Okay. So Betty Boop.
Yeah,
Who else we got?
Betty Boop's here. The guy who did the voice, one of them.
Find it.
One of the guys on The Voice.
Oh, on The Voice,
the
the show?
Voice, yeah.
I thought you just meant who did a voice, like a voice actor.
No, that guy's here too.
All right, we got Betty Boop. We got one of the guys from The Voice.
Yeah.
That's
a guy who did a voice.
A guy
separately.
who did a voice.
Yeah, there's 3 people.
And that's it.
No, other people are here too. You know, I didn't see them come in though, but I'm sure they're inside. But it's an exciting...
So in this sort of exercise that we're doing, are you outside, like a correspondent on the scene?
I got here late.
Okay.
The awards are happening.
They've already started.
Yeah.
So you're kind of getting
So
distracted.
I assume Betty Boop is here, because why wouldn't she be?
But you don't know that.
I don't know for sure. Yeah. They won't let me in. They said it would be a disruption.
I can't imagine why anyone would ever say that. Oh,
anyway,
man.
Welcome to this historic 97th Academy Awards.
Yep. Got it.
That I knew before I started this bit.
Uh-huh.
And did not have to look it up.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tony. You didn't introduce yourself.
That's a different award show.
No, you're Tony from the Oscars. It's funny.
Oh, I see. I'm Tony from the Oscars. Oscar does the Tonys.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're gay lovers.
A passionate affair.
And this is the kind of love story that is...
coming to theaters.
That's next year.
Oh.
Yeah, as you can see, we sound like we're really excited for the Oscars, but the reality is we barely saw any of the movies this year because not a lot of them piqued our interest. So,
I don't know. Well, yeah, I guess we did see at least one.
Yeah.
But
I've seen a couple of movies that were nominated for one thing or another, but a lot of the Best Picture movies I just totally missed this year. And some of them I really had no interest in the first place. I think we talked before about, neither of us really are, Wicked people, so that wasn't anything I was super excited for.
It's Wicked's one of those things, and again, no shade to the movie or whatever, I'm just, I enjoy musicals on occasion, but I don't think I've ever, gone to the theater to see one, kind of.
I like musicals more than you do, but I'm kind of, it's with a lot of things. I like a lot of the, moody stuff, I don't necessarily
I know what you're saying. 24601.
Yes. I want my musicals to make me cry.
My name is Jean Valjean.
And I'm Tony from the Oscars.
Oh man, I forgot he was in that.
Yeah. That was his first.
Which would be me.
Yeah.
I forgot I did. Sorry.
Yeah.
I have a storied history. We don't have time to get into it, but I was in Les Mis.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. I played Russell Crowe's foil. Mm-hmm. He had a sheet of tin foil.
And that was Tony from the Oscars. Yeah. Anyway, not a lot of things that piqued my interest this year in the Oscars. Honestly, we were looking through them, and there were a lot of them that we had never even heard of. One or the other of us had not even heard of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Especially coming off of, I feel like last year we had such a big, everyone was so psyched about Barbenheimer, and there were all these movies that were super influential. So I feel like last year we had a really exciting Oscars, and this year I'm just kind of whatever.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I just don't watch enough artsy.
I used to be better about it.
Highfalutin.
I don't watch as many of them anymore. But yeah, I used to try to keep up more or less with the Oscars and see at least like the kind of main ones that garnered the most attention. It would be hard to see every movie, but this year it's like, you know, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but Amelia Perez, still not convinced it isn't just like something that somebody made up.
Literally everything I've seen from it, I'm just like, why did anybody watch this?
And I don't understand how seemingly no one had heard of it until it got nominated for Oscars. And then everyone was like, why did this get nominated for an Oscar? And I'm right there with you.
Yeah, and it won a Tony.
Penis, vagina,
Did it win a Tony?
penis.
Is that what it is? No, Golden Globe. Not
Probably a Golden Globe.
Tonys are for TV.
No, they're for theater.
Oh. What's TV?
Emmys. You should know this, Tony.
No. I cover the Oscars. I don't need to know anything else.
Yeah.
So there's two different ones for movies? There's Golden Globe and Oscars?
The Golden Globes does both film and TV.
Oh. I don't watch award shows.
Yeah.
I find them to be a little bit like just like self-congratulatory. It's just a bunch of like Hollywood people sitting around, you know, drinking and having a good time, which like fine, do that. I don't care. And just like patting each other on the back for being like, look what we made. And I'm like, I don't really care. I really only care if there are movies that I'm like especially rooting for, or like people I'm especially rooting for, or if there's any kind of, you know, juicy happenings, then I'm excited for that. But that's fair.
Most of the time it's kind of whatever.
Yeah.
I have a feeling this year it's probably going to be somewhat somber because I know they had to reschedule it with the LA wildfires going on and all that stuff. So I mean, maybe it will still have the same vibe, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit more somber just because of everything that the community's going through. But
weren't there horror movies nominated for stuff?
There were, and that's actually why I was somewhat excited this year, because there was not just one, not just two, but 3 different horror movies.
Just 3.
That got that's actually like
I know it's actually kind of a lot
for the Oscars.
Yeah.
Those 3 different horror movies got nominated for Oscars this year: The Substance, Nosferatu, and Alien Romulus. The Substance actually got nominated for Best Picture, which is also a huge deal because in all of the Oscars, The Substance is the 7th horror movie
to ever
be nominated.
Which, like, it's cool. I don't watch them. I think there's some background, you know, politics stuff that goes on with the Oscars to like get certain things to win. So I would be very surprised if The Substance does win Best Picture. I think Demi Moore is more likely to win for her actress performance than for the movie. But I do think, and you see this a lot with like movies after the Oscars, they start touting it as it was Oscar nominated.
Right.
I do think that that's a really big deal to just be like, it was nominated for not. It was so good. It was nominated, even if it didn't win.
No, definitely. I mean, I think it lends, regardless of how we may personally feel about the Oscars, it's still easily the most like prestigious award in filmmaking.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it lends credibility to have horror movies that are being nominated, especially for categories that aren't just special effects, because that's often where it kind of gets stuck, is in like costuming or special effects.
Yeah.
When we talked at length about how beautiful Nosferatu was just to look at.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure, I think it got nominated for cinematography or something. I can't
quite
remember off the top of my head, but it's like totally deserved in my opinion.
Yeah. Did it get nominated for horniest movie of the year?
They should start that category.
Yeah. It wins every year.
Every year. Yeah, it's interesting because there have been some horror movies and horror performances in the last like decade or so that I'm genuinely like, that should have won an Oscar. Like, I will never stop talking about Toni Collette in Hereditary.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, how she didn't even get nominated is beyond me.
It's like one of my favorite, if not my favorite, like modern horror movies. And yeah, I think it's absolutely ridiculous.
It's insane.
She didn't get nominated or win an Oscar or whatever. It's just crazy to me.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting though that we have 3 separate horror movies that got nominated this year, when typically if there is one at all, there's like one movie that kind of inched its way in. So, you know, I feel like that's a good sign. Maybe we are moving in a direction where it's going to be a little bit more like, it's not going to be kind of hand waved and written off as like, oh, horror movie, those are just, you know, dumb slashers that like don't mean anything or whatever, especially because commentary, like social commentary, is so common in horror, and I do think horror has a lot to say, just like any dramas or
I'm telling you,
else.
if more big name actors and stars did horror movies like more regularly, they would start getting more respect in Hollywood, right? Because there is social commentary. There is an importance to these movies. Like some of them are just dumb slasher things,
but you can say the same thing about lots of other movies.
But yeah, no, I think if we got, and I think Nosferatu is actually a really good example of that, because there were some, I mean, Lily Rose Depp is like kind of new to the scene, but also does have some like name recognition there. But it had Willem Dafoe, Nicholas Hoult, you know.
Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Yeah, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Bill Skarsgård. He's
having kind of a horror moment right now, because he's going to be in the new... The 28 Years Later that's coming out. But
like, so I think Nosferatu is kind of a good example of that. And I mean, I don't think it's being nominated for Best Picture or anything, which stupid. I think it should be nominated for that. Just my own opinion on that. But it does have this like kind of star-studded cast, and then also it looks really good, so it is getting nominations because it's like a more serious thing. I think it should be extended to movies that aren't as like serious art housey style things. You know, there's no reason Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives shouldn't have been nominated.
There's no reason. I can't think of one.
There's not a reason that it shouldn't have been at least nominated. I didn't say it shouldn't have won.
It is kind of honestly arbitrary, because I think like on its face you have this initial gut reaction of like, oh, well, the Oscars are reserved for these like serious pieces of art that like have something to say about the nature of humanity or whatever. But then also like there have been, and this is not to be flippant about the quality of those, but like there have been like Pixar movies that have been nominated, and those are what I would consider to just be kind of like entertaining, fun movies that don't necessarily, most of the time, there's some variants, but most of the time when I'm watching an animated movie, I'm not getting that like, oh, this touches on the core of what it means to be human and challenges the viewer to digest this and that, and you know, it's like it's just fun. So why do some things that are just fun get nominated, but then other things that are just fun, quote unquote, are ignored? But and money is the big question, the big thing, really. It's like lobbying. You know,
it's a this is what I mean by whole like background politics thing, right? Like it's a bunch of, you know, getting them to pick your movie, right, kind of a thing. Right. But I do think the Oscars is kind of a good segue into the movie that we watched. Yeah. Which is Them!
Exclamation point.
Yeah, because there's like a new movie. Every time I search Them on Google, a different thing comes up. It might be a show.
There was a show called Them.
Yeah, that's what comes up. That's what comes up every single time. And then I have to go back and be like, no, Them 1954.
Yeah. And then there was They/Them. A couple years ago too, which was a horror movie.
Oh, I didn't know that. But yeah, no.
And also, fun fact, you probably didn't know this, but Them! Exclamation point from 1954, the movie that we're talking about, it also got nominated for an Oscar.
That's why I was saying it's a good segue. Yeah. Because I did know that.
You did know that.
Yeah. But they didn't know that.
Them didn't know that. Yeah, they got nominated for special effects, which is honestly kind of funny if you've seen the movie.
Okay, I think we can talk about this a little bit later. Sure. As part when we get to like the ratings and everything. I think that it's funny in context to what we know now. Yes. At the time.
Agreed.
And any like when we watched it, we rented it on YouTube or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking through the comments, and there was like people who were like, yeah, I saw this as a kid and it scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
And I kind of get it.
Yeah. Well, and no, I mean, I think it's valid because I was reading some of like the review, like contemporary reviews about it when it was released, and people were praising it for saying like, you know, it's actually very good monster production, and like the fluid of them is real, like the movement of them is really fluid.
Mm-hmm.
Like it looks impressive, which, you know, considering the time and the technology that was available is cool to hear that perspective of like, oh, these monsters looked really good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did they?
See, and this is one of the things that I think makes it so like I don't know if endearing is the right word, but like if you've never seen it, let's like kind of cover the movie first, like what it's about and all of that stuff, and then we'll get into what I wanted to say here.
I gotcha. Yeah, so Them is a 1954 black and white science fiction giant monster film. That is the genre on the internet.
Yep.
And just to kind of give you a little taste of, you know, what the movie is about, it follows Sergeant Ben Johnson, who, while investigating a series of mysterious deaths, finds a young girl who is unable to speak. And with the help of an FBI agent and scientists, he discovers that all of these strange incidents are due to giant ants that have been mutated by atomic radiation. With the aid of the military, they attempt to find the queen ants and destroy the nest before the danger spreads. So it's a giant ant movie. There's ants and they're big. That's who Them is.
Yeah. There's some like pretty notable things about this movie. It's kind of an iconic film.
Yeah.
Especially in the world of sci-fi stuff.
Yeah.
There's still references that are made, like modern day stuff to it, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing I was going to say about it, and I don't know if this is like the correct term, but the thing that I find endearing about the movie is that like if you have seen it, especially through today's lens, the giant ants don't necessarily look super scary or realistic necessarily, but this movie's also like praised as being one of the best, if not like the best, like 1950s sci-fi,
right?
Giant,
like all those atomic
monster things. Mm-hmm. And so then it really makes you think how bad the other ones had to be.
Yeah, they must have been really slinging some shit.
Because again, it's not like these are hyper-realistic looking giant ants. They are clearly man-made things.
Yes, definitely.
But anyway.
I also just wanted, before we get deeper into the movie, wanted to give some of the credits.
Yeah.
It was directed by Gordon Douglas. It was based on a story concept by George Worthing Yates, who did a lot of these like kind of sci-fi, you know, monster flicks. But Ted Scherdeman actually developed the story into the screenplay. So they're both credited. But in terms of the cast, I won't go through everybody, but our main characters, we have James Whitmore playing Sergeant Ben Peterson. We have Edmund Gwynn playing Dr. Harold Medford, Joan Weldon as Dr. Pat Medford, and James Arness as FBI agent Robert Graham. There are some other folks, but those are our core group that we follow. There are heroes that we follow. The core four, if you will. Yes. But one thing I thought was interesting when I was looking into kind of the development of the film, it was a Warner Brothers picture, and originally they had intended it to be shot both in color and also in 3D.
I was reading about the 3D thing, and I think this is like so interesting.
Yeah,
that there are like little remnants throughout the film from the fact that it was supposed to be 3D.
Yeah, but some of the shots are designed in a way that once you know that, you're like, oh, that's why flamethrowers are going directly at the camera.
And yeah. No, it's like really neat. You can kind of like see it. There was like, I think the shot where Pat Medford discovered one of the little ant tracks, and she's like, there's like this ridge right behind her, and the ant comes up over the top of it. Yes. I think that's another one of those ones where you're like, I can imagine it now in 3D, and I'm like, oh, okay. And it was never made in 3D, right? Because the camera malfunctioned.
They were having issues with the equipment. It just wasn't worth the money and the hassle.
But now I'm trying to think, man. Yeah. I wish we could go back and make it 3D. Right. Because now I'm thinking this movie would have
that would have really
ripped.
Yeah. Yeah. Really the only thing that they left in. So we commented on it when we watched it that the title card them is in red. Yeah. And that's in our digitally remastered YouTube rental copy. But apparently that was something that they did leave in when they sent out to theaters. They had it in the red and blue font to kind of look like 3D text. Yeah. Just because they thought it looked striking and was cool.
Yeah. They were right.
Yeah. And now it seems like, at least with what we were able to find, it's kind of morphed over time. It doesn't look quite the same. I thought that was really cool. And
yeah, it's a really neat little...
it would be interesting to see what this movie would have been like or felt like if it had been 3D, especially if at the time, people responded really well to the special effects. I can only imagine that having the same effects but in 3D would have really heightened the experience.
I really do think so. It's again, if you look at it through today's lens, nobody's going to think this is scary, but if you try to put yourself in the shoes of this
1950s child.
Yeah, and specifically, this is one of the first, big radioactive monster movies, and it's also the first movie where Big Bug is the antagonist, the monster, the threat of the whole thing. So people literally have never seen anything like this before. Right. So imagining it through that lens, it's kind of like watching Jaws now, right? There's some scenes where the shark comes out of the water and you can kind of tell now. I mean, you could probably tell back then too, right? That it didn't. It's obviously not a real shark or anything. And I think as time goes on, it starts to look more and more like definitely not a real shark doing these things. But again, if you put yourself in the lens of somebody who's never seen anything like this before. That's pretty... it's kind of real. It's a big ant.
Honestly, as much as... to me, watching it is very obvious that it's mostly, puppetry and things. Yeah. But regardless of that, I do actually think that the puppet making is good.
Yes, and that's one of the things I do want to, kind of sing the praises of this movie, because you and I talk about this a lot when we watch horror movies, especially in today's age, more and more stuff just gets relegated to CGI. And typically, because horror movies are working with a significantly lower budget than most other movies, and CGI can be kind of expensive. The effects that they choose, the effects that, and that's the thing is they end up not being able to get the best CGI, so then they get this cheap CGI, and we've all seen really bad CGI blood, and monsters and whatever.
There's certainly a sweet spot between practical and CGI that I think is hard to thread, and if you're too far on either side, it's just gonna look it's gonna look silly.
This is one of those movies that, again, if you think about it in terms of when it was released, and it is puppetry and everything, it's actually really cool and kind of a feat that they did these.
It looks really they actually one thing I thought was impressive, so I didn't really super know what to expect. I had kind of figured in my mind that there wouldn't be a whole lot of actor ant interaction on screen because I figured that would be a way for them to avoid the issue. But there are multiple scenes where a person is being clamped in their little...
The mandibles.
And, and, it looks like a puppet, but it looks good. The scale is right. Yeah. And, it's...
These big 9 feet, ants coming and attacking people.
So, honestly, pretty good. I think that this movie definitely could have done way worse. Imagine if they had been so we're not going to put the actors and the ants together ever. So instead, we're gonna like film real ants and then like superimpose them.
Well, and some of the movies that like I think come after this, or certainly right around that period, that was a very common technique, was to film a real monitor lizard walking, and then they have the actor, and then it's two shots that they have put together, and the lizard's never actually there with the actor, so the actor's responding to nothing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're just like,
you can tell.
Yeah, and it's a big lizard, and like the only reason the scale kind of tricks you is because they put it together and they made the person, the way that they're filming it, the person looks really tiny. Yeah. So you're like, oh, okay, so it's a big lizard. But another common technique that people do with it, shark movies, I think, still do this a lot, where they'll show you like kind of a CGI thing to imply that the shark is this like monstrously large thing, and then when they show real shots of like kind of like B-roll footage of sharks swimming in water, your scale in your mind has been like set up to think, oh, this thing's like 30 feet long, but it's actually not. It's a normal sized shark. It's just you think it's that big. So, but like I think a lot of the older movies did stuff like that too, where they would film like a real ant. It would just be like walking around, but they would like build like a model city, and it's like walking through the city, and you're like, oh, okay, that's just a normal ant that's walking through a model.
Right. And it doesn't look menacing or, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they don't do any of that in this one, which is actually
they avoid that. You know, it's pretty good, especially for the time. I can imagine being freaked out by this if I was a kid at the time. I mean, to me, like, obviously we talk about ratings at the end, but like I didn't find this movie to be scary. And I know it's a little bit of like a controversial take, because I don't want to be that person that's like, oh, old movie, bad and boring, need color movie with explosions or whatever. But like, it definitely feels like an older movie in terms of its pace. I think it has the issue that a lot of people pick up on, and I think it's why they actually don't like older films.
Sure. Where
there's a lot of just like what feels like padding out the runtime, where there's just like extra dialogue, extra back and forth, extra, you know, going from one place to the other. And it's not really serving the plot. And I think especially in a movie like this, I have to imagine that basically all of that stuff that was kind of in the middle of this movie, where they're just going from like person to person and investigating, is just so that they don't have to have more shots of the ants and like the special effects and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the middle kind of third of this movie, there's a very extended sequence, which I think is kind of what you're talking about, where so they've destroyed the original nest, but they discovered that at least two queens, new queens had hatched from the eggs and gotten out of the nest before they had gotten there, and were able to kill all of the ants inside of it, and they don't know where they went.
Right. So those queens are obviously going to be able to create new nests, which is the problem, because they're trying to prevent this from spiraling out of control.
They're also trying to do this like a kind of secretly, because they don't want to start they don't want to start like a big panic nationally or globally, because as the doctor explains, like they could go anywhere. But this kind of middle third of the movie is the actors going around, like we go from New Mexico then to Washington to talk about the threat, and then
California.
Yeah, we start getting these calls in about like sightings of these, you know, big ant-like objects flying in the sky. And I think it's interesting because to me that was also the slowest part of the film. It's not like really a mystery. Like we know that the ants are out there doing that, and they're just trying to track down where they're going. And we've already seen the ants, but then we're not getting any shots of the ants. And I think it's exactly what you said, because there's a lot of talk about like one of the characters they meet up with, he's been like put in he's an asylum or whatever. He's some kind of
pilot, and he, you know, said that he saw
UFOs
that looks like ants. Yeah. And so he gets institutionalized because they're like, oh, he certainly lost it.
Yeah. And so they go visit this guy, and he's talking about it, but we never actually see the ants in flight. And you kind of would understand why, right? Like, how would they make these big ants
Beyond
fly?
Me, I don't know.
But, like, we get a lot of talking about it.
Yeah.
Instead of, like, seeing it. And then it, like, picks up again when I think they do go to California. And one of the queens has like managed to get aboard a ship that's already...
Yeah, there's like a military ship that got attacked.
And everyone's like, how would they have gotten on the ship? And they kind of conveniently hand wave it where there was like, the ship, the crew reported that like this hatch on the ship was open and like unattended with like a skeleton crew for like several hours. So a big ass ant could have easily gotten on there. And I'm like, how would nobody have...
I don't know.
The thing's huge, but whatever. Anyway, but they it starts a new nest aboard the ship, which is another crazy thing because this is like a U.S. military vessel. So I have to imagine there's people like everywhere on this thing, and they hatch and then they basically eat everyone on there,
kill the majority of the crew,
and then another military ship like comes by and they have to sink it because to contain it or whatever.
Right.
But it's like other than that, we don't really get anything into like the last...
It's a lot of exposition. It's a lot of telling us what the ants are doing while the ants are mostly off screen.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's probably largely a budget issue. But for me, it really was disruptive of the pacing. Like I was sort of into it more than I thought I was going to be at first. And then I honestly kind of got bored. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, can we just get back to the flamethrower stuff? Because and I think you pinpointed it, is that they're approaching the structure of the movie as if this is a mystery that the characters need to solve. Yeah. But it's not a mystery.
Yeah.
We know what's happening.
We know what it is.
We just don't know exactly where in the world they are. And it would have been more satisfying, I think, if their interaction was about like, oh, we're going to use science and understanding of ant behavior to exactly predict where they're going to, go next because it's the perfect conditions for a nest. Like, it would be silly, but it would at least feel like
it's like
they're actually doing something rather than just responding to things.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like, because we get the one guy who's the pilot or whatever, and there was a very funny exchange with that because again they're trying to keep this like all under wraps.
Yeah.
But they show up to talk to this guy and he's like, "Oh, you guys don't believe me, do you?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, we do believe you actually, because like this is actually real and happening or whatever." And he's like, "Oh, so you'll tell the doctors to get me out of here? I really like to get out of here."
Oh yeah.
And the guy's like, "Sure will, buddy." And then they leave the room and then the doctor comes up to him and he's like, "So, what do you," he's like, we were going to go ahead and release him. We just think he's trying to get some publicity. Right. He's not actually, like crazy or whatever." And the FBI guy is like, "Actually, don't let him out."
Yeah. Keep this guy on fucking lockdown.
Holy
what
shit.
A dick. Yeah.
Just have the government scoop him up for a little bit until this whole thing blows over.
My thoughts exactly. I was like, just bring the guy in.
Leave him in there.
Yeah. Crazy.
That's crazy. But yeah, we have that guy, and then there's a whole nother place that they go to talk to a couple of other people that they talk to, because there's like a rail car gets like busted open and like 40 tons of sugar gets stolen, and then the police have like scooped up several people
who like work for the railroad.
Yeah, like one guy works for the railroad. There's a couple of drunk people. And then there's like a woman who was like having an affair and was like pulled over from speeding home, and they're just like asking them like, "Where were you coming from? Did you see anything?" And all of them are like, "No." It's like useless information.
Yeah.
Until they get to one guy who also is a drunk.
Yeah.
But he's like habitually being like hospitalized or whatever, and they go talk to this guy, and he's the crazy rambling dude who says something insightful, and they realize they would be here. I think this is where they basically come to the conclusion that like, oh, they might be in that LA the sewer things or whatever, because one of the other women that was there was crying about her husband and boys being gone, and the husband like got his arm torn off, which we don't see any of that. He's just dead.
Yeah, again, it's a lot of telling.
Yeah, they do a really funny thing where they have the FBI guy and the local cop who initially started investigating this is somehow still on this.
He would absolutely have been kicked to the curb as soon as this went to like, oh, we're going to the White House to brief the president on it.
The like coroner guy, when they're talking about the guy who got his arm torn off, they're inside the room, and he's like got the sheet up, and we don't see the body. He's just telling us about it, but he's like, "You're gonna want to see this." And the whole time I'm thinking like, this guy's basically like, "Yeah, really get in there and look at that."
You see how that arm was ripped clean off?
You see how gross it is in there? It's real nasty. Real nasty in there. God. Yeah, no, it was really funny.
It's silly. Well, and I think it's important if you decided not to watch this movie, or if you haven't seen it yet, all of this that we've been describing is also being said by 50s detectives with their little transatlantic accents.
Everyone does it. It's so
their
good.
Big pants, short tie.
Yes.
And tall pants, short tie is how everybody is dressed.
Yep.
And it adds to the kind of the ridiculousness of it.
It's like a little time capsule.
Yes. Like, I know it was sort of the style at the time, but it's very funny to have the FBI agent with his, tiny tie being like, well, ma'am, we're gonna try to find your sons, but there's no guarantee they're still alive.
He's like just grabbing a woman by the shoulders, like, damn it, calm down!
Yes, you're hysterical.
No, it was really funny. We're watching the movie, and I was like calling stuff just before it happens. There's a little girl right at the top of this movie that gets picked up by the main cop,
Sergeant Ben,
who and his partner, as they're kind of initially getting some of the clues to this.
Yes.
She's just wandering through the desert. Mm-hmm. And they pick her up, and then eventually we come back to her, and she's like catatonic, basically. She's just not saying anything, and they're like, oh, she's just in shock. So they use formic acid from one of the ants that they killed, like a big old thing of it, or maybe they just have formic acid, whatever.
Basically just like re-traumatize her.
And so she comes to, and just before this happened, I was like, was she gonna come back and just start screaming?
Yep.
Exactly what happens.
As soon as she comes back, she starts screaming, them! Which is an insane thing to say.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know exactly what I would say if I encountered a giant, 9-foot ant. I don't think even in like the top 50 would be them.
Yeah. I would just think you would just scream, ants!
Right.
Which would seem also kind of insane.
Yeah, but they can't do that because in the beginning, they bring on this like scientist from the Department of Agriculture or some bullshit. I don't remember. But he's being like kind of coy at first, probably because he knows it sounds crazy.
Yes.
And he has this ant theory like before he even arrives, but then he's not wanting to tell the FBI agent and the cop until he gets like more solid proof.
Right.
And, at the time that they, interview this girl when they expose her to the formic acid and everything, I think they're still kind of in that like limbo period. So it's like, you really only did that because you don't want to have her confirm.
Yeah, that it's ants.
We want to keep the mystery alive for another 7 minutes.
Yeah. But there's stuff like that. They did like this.
There's also, very importantly, I can't believe we haven't said this yet, there is a lady doctor.
Oh, yeah, this is one of the other things I called, because I was like, this is an older movie, and they do this with the women characters in these movies, where like because it depends on exactly like what the movie is about, but if there's a woman in it and it's like a sci-fi thing, they're usually the scientist.
Yeah. Because
the scientist can be viewed as this like masculine role because it's like scientific and whatever, but it can also be viewed as this like more intellectual thing, whereas like
they're helpless in the field,
right?
But they're smart.
But the men are like using the guns and like going after this stuff. They're at the airport to pick up the doctors.
Yeah, Dr. Medford.
Well, and importantly, when they go to pick them up, because the FBI has like taken this like cast that they got of the ant print. They don't know it's an ant print yet. He sends it back to the office. And then the next thing we get from them is that these doctors are coming out because they want to look around and everything. And so they're waiting at the airport, and there's like reading this fax or whatever that they've gotten. And
telegram.
Yeah, and it says the doctors Medford are coming, and he was like, oh, there's gonna be 2 of them.
Yeah.
And so I was like, again, had never seen this movie, anything like that. I was like, okay, so there's gonna be 2 scientists, one of them's gonna be a lady,
right?
And the first guy gets off, and you commented that he kind of seemed like this like bumbling, almost inept guy, and it was so weird. Honestly, it was all over the place.
Like, no disrespect to that man, if he's still alive, probably not. But I don't know what the hell kind of direction he was given. Like the first couple of seconds, he's like kind of babbling like a crazy man, and it kind of gave me the impression that it was going to be like, oh, he's the like doctor, quote unquote, who's supposed to be the expert, but then the woman doctor is going to come in and she's actually kind of the brains. So it's going to like subvert your expectations. But then he also is like totally competent once he's off the plane for more than 15 minutes. I guess he was just like fucking jet lagged or something.
Yeah, I don't know. But it was really weird. Yeah. But yeah, so he gets off the plane, he's talking to them at first, and then it looks back over at the plane, and then you can see one heel coming out of the plane, and I was like, yep, there it is.
There's the lady. There's the lady doctor.
Lady doctor.
Yep. And of course, you know, when Ben and the FBI agent, who I think his name is Robert, so Ben and Robert go down into the first nest with like the flamethrowers and the cyanide gas bombs and, you know, all this stuff, because they're going to clear it out. And she ends up going with them. And of course, it's that classic, well, I don't know if a woman can go down there with us. It's going to be dangerous. You know?
We were watching it and she's like, well, I'm going to go with you. And he's like, no, you can't. And I was like, it's because she's a woman. And then like right after that, he goes like, there's no place for a woman. And I was like, yep. Like clockwork.
Yep, it's predictable. And then, of course, she insists on coming. She's like, well, you know, my father is elderly. He's not going to be able to go down there. You're going to need a scientist because you're going to need an expert who knows about what's going on. Yeah. So I'm coming whether you like it or not. You know, she's the headstrong woman archetype. Yeah. And her and Robert kind of seem to have like a little bit of a...
It's like a weird B-plot
thing. Yeah. They never really confirm it, but they have kind of there's sort of an intimacy between the two of them. Yeah. And I think that's part of it, is he's like, oh, she's just a delicate little flower. And she's like, no, I'm a real person.
I'm a real boy.
Yeah. And he's like, no, women aren't people. Do you love Halloween? Have you ever wished there was another time to celebrate that fun and spooky time of year?
Well, now you can. Hauntfest is a Halloween horror festival business that celebrates Halloween off-season.
Their next ghoulish affairs will be at Nightmare Dungeon in Greenville, South Carolina on December 13th through 15th, and at Terrapin Beer Company in Athens, Georgia on April 4th through 6th.
Hauntfest events include all sorts of themed activities, such as hay rides, freak shows, fire breathing, live music, trivia, pumpkin painting, animal encounters, a haunted trail, and much more.
The festival also hosts an array of horror and Halloween-themed vendors, offering anything from tarot readings and antiques to original horror literature, macabre artwork, and jewelry.
Don't miss out on this opportunity. Get your pre-sale tickets today for only $20.
For ticket purchases, inquiries, and more info, please visit www.hauntfest.net and follow Hauntfest on social media.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an interesting subplot. Yeah, the movie is a little crazy. We have that initial nest, and then the whole movie culminates in, you know, the final nest, which is under there's like a complex, like,
it's the storm drains underneath LA that you get access to.
There's
the LA
like miles of them. They, through the clues with the guy who got his arm ripped off and all that, they figure out that the ants have to be under there. Part of the complication is that the guy had 2 kids with him, 2 young boys, and there's a possibility that they're still alive somewhere in that system. So they can't just they don't want to just throw in a bunch of gas like they did the first time, because if the kids are still alive, that would kill them too.
There's also, I think, the potential that there's so many miles of it that like they would have to use so much gas that it would also, because it goes under LA, would basically gas out the city as well. And again, they were trying to keep this under wraps.
Though at a certain point, they do just make like a public service announcement.
Yeah, because they're like, we don't know how this is going to play out.
Mandatory curfew, and also be wary of ants. But, you know, so that's kind of the big climax of the film, is we have, you know, Ben down there in the system, and he's got his little flamethrower, and they've kind of broken people up to different areas so that they can, you know, systematically clear it. All the while, the mom of the fucking widow and mom of the 2 missing boys is just right next to the general who's getting all the live
radio updates.
Yes, which is insane. Like she
yeah,
would
because
not be
yeah,
there.
because Ben finds the kids and then he's yelling back to the guy that he was riding with.
Yes.
And he was like, "Let him know I found the kids." The guy that he's riding with comes over the radio and he's like doing it kind of matter of factly because it's a military thing. He's not like being emotional about it. He's just like relaying the information, and he's just like, "We found the kids." And then like they start to get jumped by ants. And Ben's separated from the military guy, and even if he wasn't, it would just be him and this one dude. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to get the kids out, and so like all this screaming is happening, and then the guy is in the Jeep giving the like play-by-play, and he's like, "Wow, the ants are attacking. Doesn't look good for Ben." Kind of thing. Don't know if the kids are gonna make it out.
The mom is going on this emotional roller coaster. She's like, "Oh, my kids are alive, but oh no, they're in
and then she's like, "Oh God, they're gonna die. I'm gonna hear every excruciating detail."
Oh no, now the ants are ripping their intestines out.
They're playing volleyball with the heads. like he's just.
That's what would happen if I did a modern remake of this movie. That's absolutely what would happen.
The ants are breaking it down. I don't.
Oh man, Ben's distracting them with a sexy dance. Yeah, but of course, Ben ends up dying heroically. Yeah. He gets the two kids in a pipe, heading out towards the military guy while he faces off with his, one fire, I was about to say extinguisher, but it's the opposite of that, flamethrower.
Yeah.
And just immediately gets fucking killed. Like he does not put up a fight.
Yeah. No, I actually did not see Ben's death coming. I was like, oh, certainly he's gonna get out. It's gonna be a close call, but he's gonna get out, and then the military guys are gonna shove him clear. But no, he gets grabbed
fully
and they
killed.
kill him.
Yeah, they get him. They get him with their little
it's
pincers.
It's not gory.
No, he's like grabbed around the middle, and it's just sort of implied that he
does a Wilhelm scream.
There are no less than 3 in this movie, and they're funny every single time. But especially that one, because that's like a named character that we interact with, so to then just put in the Wilhelm scream.
They couldn't just have him scream. They had to do the Wilhelm scream over it. Yeah, no, it's very funny. But yeah, he gets grabbed just before all the other guys show up.
The backup comes, and him and Robert have like a little final moment together as he's dying.
Robert's like, "Did you get the kids out?" And he's like, "Yeah, I did."
Yeah. And then dies.
And then he beefs it.
Yeah, he beefs it big time.
Yeah.
But, then there's the final confrontation. They found the nest. They're having to, use their gas and everything.
Yeah, they bring the doctor in and confirm that the egg chamber, none of the eggs have hatched, so they know that this is the last of them. And they light them on fire, and then the doctor gives this monologue right at the end about the horrors of exploding the Trinity.
Yeah. Well, bomb. All of these are kind of commentary on like the nuclear bomb. And because basically his point is that they've discovered that this is a result of radiation because the original site in New Mexico was near where they did the testing. And he's like, who knows what else could be out there?
Yeah.
Leaving it open for a sequel.
Like a big radioactive lizard who shoots lasers or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, funnily enough, this movie was like a huge inspiration for Rodin. Came out like 2 years later.
Uh-huh. It was a whole trend at the time.
Yeah.
And, and this is also kind of what I mean about like horror has always been sort of political because, it's making a statement when it's still pretty fresh about the dangers. And yes, it's taking it to this like heightened level, but that's what all movies do. Like they take them to the extreme to demonstrate a point.
Yeah, I can't remember what he says, but like because he was asking about when they did the bomb testing, and he was like, it's only been like 7 years or something like that. So it wasn't even that long ago.
Yeah. I'm not sure if the movie was supposed to take place in 1954
I don't think
or if
it
they
was.
even specified, but it's around. It's relatively fresh.
You could gather when it was supposed to be if I knew what the line he said there was, because he makes reference that it was only X amount of years ago. Right. So like you could gather if you knew
whatever
the
it
dates.
was. It was close.
But anyway,
by.
but yeah, it was a decade ago.
Yeah.
Not even that. And so yeah, it's this whole commentary about like not just the horrors of war and what that would do, but like also the danger of like we don't even know what this could do to the environment,
radiation, and the effects of that on the community, the whole sort of thing in the storm drain system where they don't want to just flood gas in there because it could gas the city. I feel like that's also kind of like demonstrating a point that just like, just because we have a weapon at our disposal doesn't mean that it's the best thing to use it, because what is the fallout of that going to be? Who else is going to get hurt? Yes, we might kill the ants. Who else are we going to hurt?
But at what cost, kind of a thing.
And, so I think they're asking those questions throughout this movie. And, this is how the genre's always been.
Yeah.
It don't get no respect, but it should.
Yeah. But yeah, back kind of to our original point with this being about Oscars that we were talking about. This movie was Oscar nominated.
Yep.
But it lost to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Oh, is that who won it? Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I could see that.
It was, nominated for an Oscar for special effects, but it lost out to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But, but that kind of goes to show you just, like, how impactful and influential the movie was. Up to, like, there are other, like, modern things. I think one of the most recent, like, references to it, probably to no surprise when I list the movie that it's in, is Ant-Man and the Wasp, I believe. There's a scene on a TV that is from this movie that's playing.
Didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's for all the gamers out there.
Fallout 3.
Yes, Fallout 3. There is a mission in Fallout 3 that is called Those with an exclamation point, and it has to do with big irradiated ants.
Which is perfect for Fallout because, of course,
if you
don't know, it's radioactive.
Yeah, Fallout. You're in a radioactive wasteland.
Yeah.
And so it's this big reference to that. I also think there's a game that I used to play. I played it actually fairly recently, which is probably why it's kind of like front of mind when thinking about this, called Zombies Ate My Neighbors, which is extremely like a giant love letter to like literally everything horror up to the time it was made.
It's an old one.
Yeah, it's a Super Nintendo game or whatever. It's great. It's a fantastic game. If you've never played it, highly recommend. It's on Nintendo Switch. Get it on there or whatever. Yep. But anyway, super fun. It's multiplayer too, so you can play it with people. But there's missions in there that have giant ants in it. And you can get, I think, on the level that the giant ants one is, the first one that they introduced them on, there's like this, it's like a hedge maze that you have to run around in. And these big purple ants can crawl over the walls and come at you. Oh, cool. But there's the weapons that they put in the level right at the start are 2 bazookas, which they definitely use in them to, create a bunch of fire on top of the ant nesting to keep them inside. Yeah. And there's also a military guy is the neighbor on that level that you can save. So I think it's a big reference to that, to this movie. And so like, it is like, it's an old movie. If you watch it, you're probably going to be like, it's a little goofy and a little silly, and you're not wrong.
It is. Yeah.
But it is also like, I think pretty influential and kind of important for movies. Turns out a lot of these old horror movies are actually kind of important and influential.
Who would have thought?
To like modern day stuff. Weird how that works.
Yeah, crazy.
Let's go ahead and talk about our rating.
Yeah. I will say my rating for this movie isn't super high. And that's not necessarily because it's like, this terrible movie or whatever. It's just, I think it's not particularly scary to me watching it in 2025. And also I didn't really, it wasn't really able to compensate in terms of like entertainment, because like I said, while there were points of it that I found entertaining, the big middle act was just, to me, kind of a slog. And so my score is probably quite a bit lower than yours. But anyway. Yeah,
I think overall you rated it lower than I did. But that's okay. We're different people and we can have different opinions about things.
I gave it a 3.7, which is really low.
Oh, yeah, you did. Wow, you're over 2 points there. That's probably the biggest difference.
This is definitely the biggest
we've had.
jump.
Yeah, I gave it a 5.8 overall for me, which brings our combined average to a 4.8, which is, I think, really low for this movie in terms of like what it means to more specifically the sci-fi genre, but also a little bit of the horror genre.
And I will say too, I think that that's also part of my bias, because while I love horror and there is certainly crossover, I'm also not really a sci-fi person. I'm not a big monster person. It's just not my thing. So I think I was always poised to be a little bit biased towards this, because I'm just not the target audience.
I think that's fair.
Like, I can fully recognize that, like, how influential something like Godzilla is. I don't really feel strongly about those movies.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of my little blind spot where, like, big monster stuff, I don't really care about it that much.
But specifically, you mean, like, big monsters in terms of, like, Godzilla or big irradiated ants. But, like, if it were a movie that was, like, this is about a really big alligator, would that be scarier? Not that it's irradiated, it's just really big and killing people.
Probably not. No, that sounds stupid.
Okay. Well, Hannah hates animals, so we'll see you next time.
I just don't find them that scary. It's like the only times I've really found like animals to be scary in horror movies is when they're acting in like a normal animal behavior way, when it's more like survival horror. Like, I don't really care about, like, we watched that alligator movie Crawl. Where, like, they were having, like, the flooding, and then the alligators, and they're caught underneath the house and everything. The alligators don't act like that, okay? So, like, I don't really care.
I'm sorry. I forgot about the time you were trapped under a house that was flooding, being infested with alligators. Sorry, Hannah's an expert in this, so she would know.
Yeah.
That gave me vibes of my favorite Bigfoot thing from Matt. There's a guy called Matt Moneymaker.
Except I'm going to stop you right there because I know what you're going to say.
There's a difference. Okay. Yeah, there is a difference. I'm just saying it gives me the same vibes as this. In like the first episode of this show called Finding Bigfoot, you can find it single-handedly my favorite moment of this thing. My friends and family, I've talked to them about this. They're going to know what I'm talking about when I talk about this. They interview a guy. He tells them about his encounter with Bigfoot. He describes what the Bigfoot looks like. And then it cuts to this guy, Matt Moneymaker, who leads up this research organization group. And he just says, they don't look like that, in the most matter-of-fact way, which is the funniest shit I've ever heard in my life.
And again, my counter-argument, what I was going to say, is that alligators are, one, real.
I've only ever seen them in cages, so they could be robots.
And two, like, we have observations of their behavior. Like, we have, like, studies you can look at. And so, I don't really find unrealistic animal behavior to be that scary. Like, something
I think that's fair.
Something like Cujo is actually scary to me because that's, like, a real survival horror situation.
Yeah, well, that's a dog with rabies.
A dog with rabies who's big and who is acting like a dog with rabies would act.
Yeah.
But I don't really find it scary when it's an animal, but it's doing something that animals wouldn't do, you know?
Yeah. What about the Meg?
I don't find the Meg scary.
Okay.
This is actually right here. This is probably the biggest difference in our taste between myself and Curtis, because until we started dating, I have watched more animal horror movies, more shark movies, more things like that since you and I have been together than ever in the rest of my life, because I would just never choose to put it on myself.
Yeah, animal horror movies, and specifically shark-centric horror movies, are my guilty pleasure. I watch them a lot, and you know that almost immediately when the credits roll, I will rant for like an hour and a half about how bad that movie was that I just spent time watching. And I'm sure the whole time you're like, you didn't have to watch it.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on in my mind. It's like, I feel the same way, which is why I wouldn't be watching this if I wasn't being forced.
But you don't know until you watch it.
No, I do.
No.
Because I've always been right. I've never been pleasantly surprised
you're not going to know if 47 meters down uncaged with the blind sharks in an ancient temple that's underwater is good or bad unless you watch it.
You're never gonna know.
You might suspect. but you're not gonna know.
Yeah.
It was bad.
Or like that terrible one that you watched where it was like at like an aquarium and all the animals got like zombified.
Oh yeah, but I watched that knowing it was going to be like truly terrible.
Well, you can't know unless you
No,
watch
that's
it.
different. That one you could tell. I can't remember what it was called. It was like Aquarium of the Dead or something like that. It was very stupid. The zombie virus gets into
the animals at the zoo, at the aquarium.
Yeah, and they all die, and then they come back, and there's like a zombie octopus and shit.
Yeah,
it's
they're like breaking through the
incredibly
glass and shit.
stupid. Yeah. Anyway,
send me hate mail if you must. I just this just isn't my thing.
No, that's fair.
I'm honestly I am one of those weird people that's of the opinion that like science fiction movies like aren't really even horror movies. I think there can be crossover, but just because a movie is science fiction, like sometimes people group them together.
Okay, I agree. Yeah, just because something is science fiction does not mean it is horror.
But a lot of people will like lump them into
the
same
There's
genre.
a lot of crossover, I will say.
Yeah.
But yes, I don't think just because something is a sci-fi movie means that it is a horror movie.
Right. But if anyone has recommendations of maybe sci-fi horror movies, I mean, I've seen Alien, like that movie, that's all well and good. But if there's any like hidden treasures that you think might change my mind or give me some, y'all have probably gotten to know my taste a little bit now. So what big giant monster or sci-fi horror movies should I give a chance? Because I am honestly kind of a hater.
I mean, she's seen a lot of the shark ones already, so
none of those were
if
good.
you send those in, those are for me. Just know that I'm gonna add those to my list. I have seen all of the Deep Blue Sea movies.
Yeah.
I've seen all of the Jaws movies. I've seen both of the 47 Meters Down.
We watched the Meg and the Meg 2, The Trench.
Yeah, but you gotta admit, Meg 2, The Trench, actually pretty fun. The Meg, not as fun.
Fun is different. And also, the Meg in particular, I think, is more of a sci-fi action movie than it is horror.
Oh, I would never describe it as horror.
That's one of those examples because sometimes people will say the Meg, and I'm like, I don't think that's a horror movie. I don't think it meets the basic criteria.
Jason Statham is like my guilty pleasure action movie thing. I'll watch anything. He plays the same guy in every single one of them, and he's in those. If you don't know, he's in both of those movies. If Jason Statham is in it, it's an action movie. So
100%.
It ain't horror.
I'm glad we can at least agree on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not going to fight you on that. But anyway.
But like I said, always open to suggestions, and we're always looking for suggestions for the show. So if you have any sci-fi horror you think I should give a chance that might change my opinion, hit me up. We're on social media. It is at First Fright Pod. That's on Instagram and X. We also have a Facebook page. It's the podcast name, Love at First Fright, or you can send us an email. It's firstfrightpod@gmail.com. Send us your recommendations, your thoughts, your suggestions. Yeah, talk to us. We love to hear from you.
Yeah.
You got anything else you wanted to discuss today? Oh, I did want to say there was one thing. We joked about creating a horniometer for part of our scale, and I did rate this one on the horniometer.
Yes, I forgot to do that.
So I gave it, and it goes from a scale of 0 to 100.
Yeah.
I gave it a -2. I thought this was anti-sexual.
Oh wow, you thought it was just dry.
I thought it was like anti-horny, sort of watching it.
Yeah, but they had that whole thing with the FBI agent and the one doctor.
No.
Kind of a will they, won't they?
No, it wasn't horny though. They didn't pine for each other.
Yeah.
What would you give it?
Well, the ants definitely were getting it on because
they were making babies.
So I'm going to cancel out your -2. I'm going to give it a +2. So it's a 0.
It's a 0. Okay, I can live with that. I can live with that. Yep. So
we still don't really know how the horniometer works. It's kind of this nebulous thing of you know whatever.
When it's relevant, we'll whip out the horniometer. Yeah, we will.
It'll pop up from time to time.
It came.
Yeah. Although, did we do a horniometer for Terror Train?
I don't think we did.
No, 100. Just pants.
I mean, it is actually a fairly horny movie. I would maybe give it like a...
It's not 100. That's a joke. It's gonna... No. It's... I think, to be fair, it's like a 45.
I was gonna say like a 64.
I'm not doing the math on that. It's somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in the 50s.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of horny, but not as horny as it could be.
Yeah. Could be horny.
It could definitely be hornier.
That's my notes for that one. Could have been hornier.
Feedback for both them and Terror Train is that could have been hornier.
Yeah.
And on that note.
Yeah. I think that's going to do it for us today. And as always, scare well and see you next time.
Bye-bye.
It's them!
Penis, vagina, vagina to penis.
Oh, no.
Ant, penis to a vagina.
Stop it.